So, good afternoon. Today is September 29th, 2018, and we're talking about codependence. In fact, the title of today is Codependence, How to Move from Dysfunction to Interdependence. We have 2 more weeks after this one, when to say yes, when to say no, and when to say goodbye. And then week 6 is living without fear, communicating fearlessly. I'm really tickled to have been able to share this. There have been 12 people involved with this series this time, and I think that we've learned a lot. I've actually had people sending me emails about situations in their workplace where they have begun to identify situations that are more toxic or that involve communication styles that are like passive aggressive. That seems to be a common thread with a lot of people, that there are passive aggressive communication styles that take place not only from the top down with those that are in power and have some control, but also with patients where they feel like they're being manipulated. And so I'm very pleased that the 2 weeks on communication styles and on manipulators seem to be really helpful to people who were struggling with that in the workplace. So today I want to talk first and foremost about the causes of codependent behavior, because it's easy to vilify other people that we work with and or people in our homes or families of origin, and really identify them as having dysfunctional or toxic behaviors. But it's another thing to, with some compassion, look at the causes of these aberrant or dysfunctional behaviors and have some compassion for how it all started in the first place. So generally, codependent behavior starts as a result of early childhood experience. And it can often begin with a child who is what a lot of people would identify as wise beyond their years. They're very mature. Later, as they get into counseling or begin to reflect on their childhoods, they identify themselves as a parentified child, meaning that they weren't just allowed to be their childish, immature selves and mature naturally, but instead they were really having much more power and control than they were comfortable with, and had to show up in a way that wasn't fair. Another issue that can cause codependent behavior is substance abuse in the home, where there is a parent who has an alcohol or drug issue, or maybe even prescription drug issue. And so when they're there, when they're on, it's great. But when they are not doing well or under the influence, then things are scary and erratic. And that often requires that the child sort of rise up into a more adult-like role, even though they're not equipped to really take on that role. A controlling parent who allows little autonomy is often also the way codependence begins, because the child never really learns to trust themselves. Instead, they're told every move to make, and they are punished or rewarded for every little mistake they make, or every little behavior that is positive or seen as positive. Then they're rewarded. And so they start to feel as if they can't move without being dominated by this controlling parent. And they often give up trying. These are children that sometimes you may have heard them described as having had their will broken, where they no longer really have a sense of self so much as they're always in deference to the controlling parent, maybe with a little bit of fear, maybe with a little bit of feeling of futility. And so when you give up your power in that way, starting very young, it's easy then to be a passive person that is dependent then in codependent relationships as an adult. Enmeshed and isolated family systems create this. A chronically ill parent or caregiver, where perhaps if you have a parent who has severe diabetes or MS or some even long-term cancer patient, the child then has to take on the role of being much more mature than they're ready for, and they begin to have this codependent behavior even as a child where they're other focused. Now in this situation you could argue, well, that's a good thing or something that you can't really change, because if you have a parent who has cancer and you are taking care of and supporting your parent and trying to be helpful, that's a good quality, that's a good thing. But it can create this tendency to be so other focused that you deny your own needs, that you put others before yourself to such a degree that you suffer the consequences for that. Children who are punished for emotional expression, then we often look to the adults to signal us when it's okay to laugh, when it's okay to cry, when it's okay to be angry. And that's, again, giving our power away so that when we become adults and we're in intimate relationships or work relationships, it's easy to be looking outside of ourselves for validation of our feelings, for reinforcement, for permission to even feel what we're feeling. And then lastly, a parent who overly confides in a child helps to create this codependent behavior. This is the parent who says, your dad takes daughter aside and says, your mom hasn't been the same since your brother was born. She's really suffering right now. We need to be patient with her. I don't know if I can even stay in this marriage, but I'm doing the best I can. And then again, this child begins to feel as if so much responsibility is on their shoulders, so much is up to them, that they can really start being so other focused, denying themselves, being anxious actually about what's going on. A parent who confides in a child as if they're a confidant does a huge disservice to the child, because children are not ready for that. They are not our friends, they are our children. And our parents are designed to be the authority figures in our lives, the ones who are directing and guiding, those who can give us counsel, not the other way around. So some of the symptoms of codependence are low self-esteem, not being able to say no or set boundaries, putting others first to the detriment of yourself, having control issues, noticing anxiety and fear of disapproval, and people pleasing. So those last two, anxiety and fear of disapproval or people pleasing, those are actually two different things, because a person who is anxious and afraid of being judged or disapproved of often tends to disappear and fade into the shadows. These are the people that are very quiet, don't make waves, keep their head down, and just try and do a good job and not garner any overly positive or overly negative attention. And this helps them stay more stable and avoid the anxiety and fear of making someone upset, or even setting expectations where someone expects you to show up in a way that may feel like too much responsibility, too high of expectations. People pleasing, on the other hand, is where we're bending over backwards, like the napkin says on this slide, to say please and thank you, to show people we appreciate them. You know, sometimes these people are accused of being suck-ups because they're so focused on pleasing others. Sometimes sort of our Judeo-Christian culture encourages this, where we are really about pleasing the other. But what happens in that scenario is we start to be less than authentic and even less than honest. Because if I'm so focused on pleasing you, I am not focused on what my needs are. And therefore, over time, I can begin to feel resentful and entitled, and as if somehow someone has done me wrong, even though it's as a result of my overtly trying to please others. Low self-esteem is not necessarily just a sign of codependence. There are lots of reasons for low self-esteem, but when you have been raised in an environment like I described in the previous slide, where there's been too much responsibility, when you have had to really act like an adult even when you were a child, you're never really going to feel as if you measure up, and it's going to be so hard and such a struggle that often that creates low self-esteem. One of our goals in this class is to learn to begin to say no and to set boundaries with others. No's don't have to be hard. You don't have to be, a hard ass to say no. There can be soft no's or no's that are, I don't think so today, but thanks for asking. And then finally, before I move on from this slide, I want to talk about the control issue piece. Sometimes that focus on others and doing for others and giving to others, when we're in the driver's seat and we're the one taking action, we're actually the one in control. And we get to feel a little more confidence, a little more safety in that. But for the other person who might say, oh, don't worry, I can get my own drink. No, I'll get you a drink. What do you want? Coke, water, milk? No, I'm fine. When I'm thirsty, I'll get up and get a drink. No, tell me now. I'm up. What do you want? Milk, Coke, or water? And so the person finally gives up and says, okay, I'll take a Coke. And then in that situation, we remain in control. We remain in control of what the other person drinks and the timing of that hospitality, which isn't always hospitality, but is actually control. So I would encourage people during this next week, ask yourself, are there places in my life where my self-esteem is showing? Sort of like, excuse me, your slip is showing. Is my low self-esteem showing? Secondly, at the end of the week or during the week, ask yourself, are there times this week when I said yes, when I really wanted to say no? And if the answer to that is yes, then I would encourage you to make a list of what those times were. And they can be, simple. It doesn't necessarily mean, saying no to somebody asking you to work a double shift. It can mean saying no to someone who asks you to do a favor for them that is, rather, benign. But if you would have rather said no, oh, can I call you tonight and tell you about such and such? And you have the evening planned. You really don't want a phone conversation. But you, instead of saying, well, actually, I'm not going to be available tonight, say, oh, sure, go ahead and call. And then you're looking at the clock. You can't wait to get off the phone. You're feeling frustrated. A patient says to you at the end of your visit, oh, I have one more question. I used to have clients who did this to me all the time. We would have spent an hour and 15 minutes together. And I'd say, okay, in the last 5 minutes, I'd be saying, okay, we're going to wind down now. This has been a great time today. Let's recap what we did and what we discovered. And the hand on the clock would hit the designated time. We would have been together an hour and 15 minutes. and my client would say, oh, I just remembered one more thing. Now that happens occasionally, but there were some clients who did that every single time. And so what I had to get good at doing was saying, oh, I'm sorry you forgot. So once you leave, feel free to send me an email or text if you want to, reminding me what it is, and we'll talk about it next time. Or I'll make a note here, and next time we meet, I'll bring it up and remind you that you wanted to talk about that at the end, and we'll talk about it at the beginning. It was really hard to say that the first time. I felt very self-conscious, but after you get used to doing that, especially with patients, to be able to say, oh, I'm sorry, I have to get into the next room, my next patient is waiting. Feel free to, leave a message with the gal at the front desk, and I'll put that in your chart, and we'll start with that next time. Complicating factors to becoming codependent are having a narcissistic parent, a domestic violent past where you had a parent or a spouse or significant other who put you in the situation where you experienced domestic violence, either firsthand or as an observer, addiction, and dual mental health issues. So if you have any of these issues as complicating factors in your life, where you can identify having had a narcissistic parent, where it's all about them, and of course it's all about them because they probably didn't get their needs met when they were a child, and so those individuals grow up saying me, 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 because they've learned that no one else is going to attend to their needs. They have to clamor and put themselves first. So we can have compassion for how that developed, but something that needs to happen with a narcissistic personality is that we have very strong boundaries, that we are very clear that it's not all about them, and we model making time and space for others, and hold tight to our boundaries. In a domestic violence situation, safety always comes first. No matter how much you care for the person who's coming unglued, it's not safe, and it's enabling to stay in that situation and only perpetuates the violence. As much as we like to think it was one time, or it's not that bad, or it's only emotional violence. If you have been in an emotionally abusive situation, I would strongly recommend taking a course on nonviolent communication so that you can begin to sort of get a reality check about the role violence should play in your life, which is next to none. Addiction, of course, absolutely fosters and fuels codependence. And if you live in a situation where someone you know or love or work for has dual mental health issues, that often fuels codependence, because it's very, very difficult to work with one mental health issue, let alone several. And when that happens, it's almost a given that we're going to be so focused on the other person and what they're struggling with and what the drama of the day is, that there's no time or space for us. So narcissistic parent, domestic violence, addiction, or dual mental health issues are red flags that would indicate that you may have a propensity for codependence if you've experienced that in your life. I wanted to talk a little bit about trauma bonds. There's a link here, and when I forward this on to you, hopefully you can click on this link, because there's some very good information about what trauma bonds are. Trauma bonds are bonds forged by trauma. It is not typical relationship. It is relating to each other as a result of the trauma that connects us both. And because these bonds are incredibly strong, we have to be very, very careful that we're not just bonded to someone in trauma rather than in a loving relationship. Or we're not staying in a work relationship because we love our work and respect the person we're working for, but we've been through so much trauma and drama with them that we're really bonded in the trauma and drama. So I wanted to mention here some signs of trauma bonds. This isn't on the slide, but I will send this to you as an attachment. So I want you to just notice if you hear yourself in any of these descriptors. Sign of trauma bond is feeling as if you can't leave your partner or work situation, even though the relationship or work situation is extremely toxic for you. Feeling powerless over your future. Having sleeping difficulties and eating problems. Having thoughts of suicide. Feeling easily startled or overreactive in everyday situations. Checking your cell phone every 2 to 3 minutes for messages from your partner, loved one, or boss. Rarely going outside the home because there's usually a price to pay. If you do go out, there's always a deep sense of urgency to return. That can happen in the workplace too, believe it or not. Being almost afraid to go to the bathroom or take a little break and go to lunch, checking your phone every few minutes while you're gone, having this deep sense of urgency, I have to get back, for fear that you're going to get in trouble, can be an indicator that there's more of a bond around the trauma and drama in the workplace rather than a deep and abiding respect and sense of responsibility. Stopping doing things in your life because you're exhausted or have lost interest because so much time and energy is taken by the trauma bond. No matter the contributions and sacrifices you've made, you feel you haven't done enough. Developing OCD tendencies because you're hypervigilant. Experiencing panic attacks, fear of leaving, nightmares, PTSD. Another sign, let's see, I think there are a couple more here. Hiding your partner's cruelty and abuse or lying to friends and family about your reality. You tend to accept accountability for the bad things that happen in your partner's life and feel the need to fix the problems always. Doubting yourself and your sanity, believing you might be the crazy one. That's a really important one. That happens at work and at home. For a long time, people go along and they're very clear. This is not right. This is not healthy. This is dysfunctional. This is toxic. And then one day, somehow, they begin to start to doubt themselves, saying, maybe it's not so crazy. Maybe I'm the crazy one. Maybe it's me, especially if you have a boss who's always making you feel as if you don't measure up, or a partner who's always acting as if you're the one that's causing all the problems and drama. You can start to feel as if you're the crazy one. And so if that switch has happened, or you can reflect on relationships, personal or professional, where you have gone from being outraged and self-righteous about the situation to sort of caving and feeling despairing and beginning to wonder if you're the crazy one, that's a very good example of a trauma bond. Feeling a relentless need to give to your abusive partner or work situation, always giving the other person the benefit of the doubt, always to your detriment, and not wanting to say no or stand up for yourself because you're afraid you'll be seen or perceived as mean or selfish. So I want to make sure that everyone listening spends some time reflecting on the areas in your life that have been negatively impacted by dysfunction, by some of the curveballs that life can throw at all of us, or whether you really have some places in your life that have been so infused with trauma and drama, because wherever trauma is, there's bound to be drama, and whether you aren't connected to some of the people from that situation in a bond over the trauma versus really a relationship based on mutual interest, mutual caring, mutual goals. So one of the list of ways to counteract trauma bonds is to live in the present, not living in the past, not future tripping, but staying present in the moment. You know, if some of these characteristics that I just read from Kim Saeed, who has written about these trauma bonds, I'm going to send you this handout. If you notice yourself on that page, to in the moment when you feel the sense of urgency, when you feel as if you're the crazy one, when you have begun to isolate, when you are checking your phone all the time, when you are hypervigilant at work, to say to yourself, okay, I'm stopping remembering and looking at what's horribly gone wrong in the past and scaring myself about that. I'm also not going to future trip and try and, project what's going to happen in the future. Instead, I'm staying in this moment. In this moment, am I safe? In this moment, can I say no? In this moment, can I release some of that hypervigilance and just be accountable and be present? Notice when you start making excuses for your own behaviors or someone else's behaviors. That is a danger signal. And so to pause, to say to yourself, oh, I noticed that I'm making an excuse here. I noticed that I'm justifying my boss's poor behavior. I'm not going to do that. That doesn't serve my boss. It doesn't serve me. And when you shift that, then you can begin to move into a healthier relationship with the person rather than a dysfunctional relationship. I have noticed this with physicians who've talked to me about blurred boundaries with a patient, and usually they'll say to me, I don't know, this patient has just crawled into my heart. And I'm always curious about like that situation. Is this a situation where it's really a healthy relationship, a patient, physician, or nurse practitioner relationship that feels like it's just deepening and it's mutually respectful? Or is this a situation where boundaries have become blurred and I hear the physician starting to make excuses for the patient? I know that we should get them on a plan to get off the opiates, but her husband just left and I just feel like this would be a bad time and I don't want to create some kind of worsening trauma in her life. Usually those types of justifications and excuse making is a signal that you may be connected to this person in a less than healthy way, because setting boundaries is a good thing no matter the life circumstances. So if this person lost their husband, this is the perfect opportunity to find healthy ways for them to feel supported and to support themselves rather than staying in dysfunctional, codependent, or trauma bond relating. Quit second guessing yourself, and acknowledge the trauma. When you notice. So for instance, for the physician who almost lost a patient to suicide, a patient does an attempt to suicide and barely makes it. And so then that physician becomes hypervigilant. There's a trauma bond that begins. There's blurred boundaries. Stop. Acknowledge the trauma. Acknowledge what you've just been through. Be patient with yourself. And ask yourself what really needs to happen in this situation. If it wasn't for the suicide attempt and this patient was coming to see me, just as one of my other patients who sees me, what would my plan of care be? How would I be relating to this person? What would my expectations be? What would my rules be? And then this is the time when you acknowledge the trauma to really use a mentor or someone who is a confidant to say, I'm in this situation. I can't give you the details because of HIPAA, but I need you to understand that I've gotten myself into a situation where my boundaries aren't very good with this patient. And I don't think it's good for me, and I know it's not good for them. And I need to sort of run by some hypotheticals with you or get some encouragement and guidance on how I can extricate myself from a situation where I may have bonded over the trauma. You can talk to your therapist about it. You can always call me. I know you can call Pamela Weibel as well, but please, if you notice there are some patient relationships that are sort of orchestrated around trauma, then talk to me. And then finally, set limits. Just because something bad has happened doesn't mean you let go of all limits. So interdependence versus codependence. The first and foremost thing to know about developing interdependence versus codependent relationships is to be very mindful and thoughtful about this relationship, whether it's a professional or personal relationship. What are your expectations? What are the other person's expectations? What are the rules, or what is the structure for the relationship? I often call it a container. You know, what's the container for this relationship? Is if it's a patient, then it's a work container. If it's personal, then it's a more intimate, familial or friendship container. And then to be very clear with yourself, what you expect from yourself, what you expect from the other person. If you were to make a list of what the guidelines and structure for this relationship is, what would that be? So for example, if you have a friendship that is somebody that you see every 2 or 3 months, you're not calling them every day, but you check in every 2, 3 months, you catch up, you share war stories, you have cared for each other for a long time. You know, what's your expectations? What's the other person's expectations? Do you take turns calling each other and making that date for getting together every 2 or 3 months? Who takes the main role in that? Or do you take turns? And if you would say to yourself, well, the other person always calls and makes the arrangements, then maybe you need to check in with them and say, you know, I've been thinking about our relationship and noticing that every 2 to 3 months, you're the one that calls me to set up the next date. And I'm wondering if that feels yucky to you, if you feel like you'd like me to show up sometimes and take that initiation and to be motivated to make that time together. And maybe they say, oh, no, it doesn't matter to me, this is fine. But they might say, actually, that would be really cool. I hate the fact that I'm always the one that's reaching out. And you can begin to design sort of a structure to what the expectations are that you both have. Secondly, what are the needs? Your needs and the other person's needs. Needs are different than expectations. I may expect you to call me every 2 months and see if I'm available for lunch. That doesn't necessarily mean I need you to do that. Perhaps what I need from you is connection every 2 to 3 months. And so what does that connection look like? What needs do I get met in that time we're together? And what needs do you have that are met in that time together? What are you responsible for versus what the other is responsible for? So in a patient relationship, when you say, okay, this is the structure and the rules of the relationship. I'm the physician, they're the patient. They come to me with their health issues, and we collaborate on what the plan of care will be. I am the one who is in a position of authority that sort of is the last word when it comes to prescriptions and some of those types of things. But when it comes to the plan of care, we have agreed that we are collaborating together, that there's a structure. They bring their concerns. I bring my wisdom and expertise. I identify their needs in this patient-physician relationship. I also identify my needs, which is I need my time to be respected. I need clear and concise communication about what the needs are. And then I need us working together to meet those needs. This can't just be a bitching session where the patient comes in not taking any responsibility for what's going on with them, and then, says, hey, doc, fix me. That may have been a patient-physician model that worked years and years ago, but that is not a modern day model. So to be very clear about what the needs are, what the expectations are, what the rules are, what the structure of the relationship is, what are you responsible for versus what the other is responsible for, always communicating honestly. Holding back in deference to the other person with the idea that you don't want to hurt them or you don't want to give them too much information never works well. Sometimes using discernment, if you have a patient that has said to you, I know I have cancer, I know I'm going to die of cancer in the next 2 years, as we start to get closer to the end, I want you to just tell me things are looking serious, but I don't want to know time and date and, you have less than a week to live. That'll just freak me out. So don't tell me that, but just sort of keep your finger on the pulse and let me know sort of when the time is that I need to sort of get my last plans, my last legal and relational responsibilities into alignment. So communicate honestly, listen to what they want from you, but that doesn't mean then you start protecting them and not telling them what you really should. Be direct. Practice saying yes and no, both. Notice which you're most comfortable saying. I'm actually someone that I read this book recently, Shonda Rhimes, where it was her year of yes, where she realized that she went through her life saying no all the time and sort of isolating herself and not taking opportunities. And so she said no. And so she made the decision to have a year where she primarily said yes. And she said yes even when she was uncomfortable. Sort of the opposite for me. I'm somebody that always says yes. Can you do this? Of course. Will you help me with this? Yes. Are you available now? Yes. I'm very comfortable saying yes. However, sometimes I say yes before I pause and think about whether I really want to do what I've just committed to and whether it's best for the other person and for myself. So I've given myself permission to sometimes say, wait a minute, I need to pause and just see if this is really a yes or whether I need to say maybe or no. And people respect that. I have not yet had anyone who has been grossly offended by that. In fact, quite the opposite. People trust you a little more when they know that you're going to be honest with them and say exactly what you feel. Also here at the end of this slide, I have a good therapy link that talks about codependency. It's one of the good ones out there that really has a pretty in-depth discussion. For those of you that took the codependency test, I'd be curious when we talk to hear about whether you found that you were highly codependent, mildly, moderately, severely. I've already heard from, I think, about half of the 12 people in this class. And it's been quite revealing. There have been several who are pretty severely codependent and others who are more in the moderate range. And there may be some who are listening or watching who have taken the test and found out that it's not a huge issue for them. I think that the biggest difference between codependence and interdependence is really asking for something and participating with someone out of choice, out of volition. I am doing this because I want to. Codependence is often grounded in have to. I really have to do this. I have no choice. I feel obligated, and all the excuses that go along with why the other person needs you to show up in a way that is less than best for you. Interdependence is I want to help you, you want to help me. We both know that if we're not able to be there for each other, we're perfectly capable of finding someone else who can help. I am not relying on you because I am helpless. I am relying on you because we have an agreement, and we have both taken responsibility and said how we're going to show up and what the rules and structure are. That even goes for things like moves. You know, you often hear people asking other people to help when they're in the midst of a physical move, and people talk about dreading it and feeling obligated, and they make all these excuses about how the other person needs them, and they really wish they didn't have to do it, but there's no other choice. That is never the truth. If you cannot help someone in a way that they've asked you to help, what you most need to do is just be very clear with yourself first about what you want and why, and then very direct and kind with the other person, describing that it will work for you or it won't. I would caution you against major explaining and going on and on about all the whys and wherefores, because that starts to sound defensive and starts to sound codependent, frankly. But if you can just say, oh, I wish I could help you move. I certainly wish you well in finding someone else. In fact, I've heard of this great company that charges very little, or my son may have Sunday off and maybe he can help you, but I'm not going to be able to. You know, just adult communication where instead of feeling like it's all up to you or it's all up to the other person, you're the one that's in control, or you're the one that's totally dependent. Fueling and fostering interdependence where everybody shows up, clear about what the rules and structure are, identifying their own needs, being responsible for what they want, and being clear about what they want from the other person and what they're responsible for, communicating honestly, and practicing saying yes and no equally.